The red dust swirled around Aminata's bare feet as she stumbled through the gates of Sikasso, her once proud bubu now nothing but tattered strips clinging to her weathered frame. The sun beat mercilessly overhead, but it was not the heat that made her tremble, it was the weight of the message she carried, a message that could either save or damn the most powerful man in the Wassoulou Empire. Traoré Ibrahim Katié. Traoré Ibrahim Katié, she called out in Bambara, her voice cracking like dry leaves. I must see the Fama. The spirits of our ancestors cry out. The royal guards, resplendent in their indigo robes and silver amulets, looked upon this woman with a mixture of disgust and curiosity. How dare this beggar, this djinn of the streets, demand an audience with their emperor? Yet something in her eyes, wild, urgent, touched by the other world, made them hesitate. Yamanyi? What is this? The captain of the guard, Mamadou Kone, approached with measured steps. His hand rested on the carved ivory handle of his curved sword, but his voice carried the careful respect one reserves for those who might commune with spirits. Woman, you speak madness. The Fama receives no one without proper. The white men come from the north. Aminata's voice rose like a praise singer's call, cutting through his words. I have seen it in the smoke of the sacred fire. Colonel Archinard marches with 1,000 soldiers and the thunder weapons that split trees. They come for our Fama, they come for our gold, they come for our children. The mention of Archinard sent ripples through the assembled crowd. Even the boldest warriors had heard whispers of this French colonel who had already conquered Ségou, who turned kings into puppets and proud peoples into servants. Mamadou's hand tightened on his sword. And what would a mad woman know of such things? Aminata's eyes blazed with the fire of ancient knowledge. Because I am Aminata Baro, daughter of the Griot Seko Baro, keeper of the old songs. Because I escaped from Ségou when the white men put chains on Amadou's children. Because the bones of my grandmother speak to me in dreams, and they weep for what is coming. The crowd fell silent. To be a griot was to be a keeper of history, a bridge between the world of the living and the ancestors. Even in rags, even touched by madness, her bloodline commanded respect. From the shadows of the palace emerged a figure that made even the guards straighten. Traoré Ibrahim himself, the Fama of Sikasso, Lion of the Wassoulou. He was not a giant in stature, but power radiated from him like heat from a forge. His skin was the color of rich earth, marked with the tribal scars that proclaimed his nobility. Around his neck hung amulets of power cowrie shells, verses from the Quran wrapped in leather, and a golden pendant shaped like a lion that had belonged to his father. Let the daughter of griots speak, Ibrahim commanded, his voice deep as thunder rolling across the savannah. The ancestors guide us through many vessels. Aminata fell to her knees in the red dust, but her voice never wavered. My Fama, my lion, listen to what the spirits whisper. Colonel Archinard has sworn an oath to his white queen across the great waters. He will not rest until every king bows to their flag. Ségou has fallen. Jen bends the knee. Only Sikasso stands between them and the great river Niger. Ibrahim's counselors shifted nervously. Among them stood Tieba's old advisors, the traditional chiefs who had served his predecessor, men who believed in the old ways, in protective charms and the council of marabouts. There were also the younger men, those who had seen the power of the white man's weapons and urged caution. Fama, spoke Bakary Kamara, an elder whose white beard spoke of countless seasons. The woman speaks truth about Archinard's movements. Our spies confirm it. But our walls are strong. Our gree-gree are powerful. The spirits of this place have protected us for generations. The younger advisor, Moussa Diarra, stepped forward. His education in the French schools of St. Louis had given him a different perspective. My lord, with respect to our elders, the French have cannons. They have the mitrailleuse, guns that spit fire like angry wasps. Faith alone will not stop such weapons. Ibrahim raised his hand for silence. Aminata, daughter of griots, you have traveled far to bring this warning. But you speak only of defeat, of submission. What do the ancestors counsel? Do they say we should flee like rabbits? The old woman's eyes rolled back, and when she spoke, her voice seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her throat. The lion does not flee, but the wise lion chooses his hunting ground. There is power in this place, yes, but greater power lies in knowing when to strike and when to withdraw. The baobab bends in the storm but does not break. Riddles? Scoffed one of the younger men. We need clear counsel, not the ravings of. His words died as Ibrahim's gaze fell upon him like a blade. The Fama turned back to Aminata, and now his voice carried the weight of ritual. Speak plainly, keeper of songs. What would you have me do? Aminata struggled to her feet, her bones creaking like old wood. The spirits show me three paths, my Fama. The first, you fight Arcanard here behind these walls. Many will die. The walls may hold, but the French will return with more soldiers, more thunder weapons. This is the path of the stubborn bull who charges the hunter's spear. The assembled nobles murmured. This was not what they wanted to hear. The second path, she continued, her voice gaining strength, you bend the knee as others have done. You keep your title but become a servant to the White Queen. Your people live, but their spirits die slowly, like a fire starved of air. Now the murmurs became angry growls. To suggest that the Lion of Sikasso should bow to any man was tantamount to blasphemy. And the third path? Ibrahim's voice was quiet, but it carried clearly in the stillness. You become the wind, Aminata whispered. You take the best of your warriors, your gold, your sacred objects, and you disappear into the deep bush. From there you strike like lightning, here, there, everywhere and nowhere. You become a legend that haunts their sleep, a name that makes their soldiers look over their shoulders. This is the path of Sundiata's wisdom. Sometimes the wise king retreats to fight another day. The silence that followed was broken by Bakary Kamara's voice, heavy with disappointment. You counsel cowardice, woman? You ask the lion to become a jackal. Aminata's laugh was like the cackle of hyenas. I counsel survival, old man. I counsel the wisdom of the spider who builds many webs. What good is a dead lion to his people? What songs will the griots sing of bones buried beneath foreign flags? Ibrahim walked to the edge of the courtyard, where he could look out over the walls of Sikasso toward the vast savanna beyond. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere out there, Colonel Arcanard was marching with his terrible weapons and his certainty of victory. Fama, Musa Daira said quietly, approaching with careful steps, whatever you decide, decide quickly. Our scouts report the French are no more than 3 days away. Ibrahim nodded but did not turn around. His mind was racing through calculations of men and supplies, of routes through the wilderness known only to hunters and rebels. But more than that, he was listening for the voice of his ancestors, for the wisdom of those who had ruled this land when it was free. Behind him, Aminata began to sing, her voice rising and falling in the ancient rhythm of the griots. Sundiata went into exile, the buffalo hid in the deep forest, but when the time was right, the lion returned with thunder in his voice, and the earth trembled beneath his feet. The song seemed to unlock something in Ibrahim's heart. He turned to face his people, and those who knew him well could see that a decision had crystallized behind his eyes. Musa, he called to the young advisor, how many of our people could we move quickly if we needed to? The warriors and their families? Perhaps 2,000, my lord. But the old ones, the children, would be safer away from a battlefield than trapped behind walls when the cannons begin to speak, Ibrahim finished. Bakary, you know the old paths through the Manding country? The elderly advisor nodded, though his expression remained troubled. I know them, Fama, but... Good. Begin preparations immediately. We move essential supplies to the hidden camps in the Kenadugu Hills. Weapons, gold, the sacred objects of our lineage. Do it quietly, like men preparing for a hunting expedition. The courtyard erupted in voices, some questioning, some protesting, some expressing relief. But Ibrahim's voice cut through them all like a master drummer's call. Hear me, children of the Wasalu. His words rang with the authority of generations of kings. We are not fleeing in defeat. We are choosing our battlefield. The French expect to find a trapped lion, desperate behind crumbling walls. Instead they will find smoke and shadows. Let them occupy empty buildings and claim victory over stones. Bakary Kamara stepped forward, his face grave but accepting. And when they have settled into our strongholds, grown comfortable with their conquest? Ibrahim's smile was sharp as a hunting knife. Then they will discover what it means to rule a land where every tree might hide a warrior, every village might be empty when they arrive but full of enemies after they leave. They seek to make me their puppet? Instead, I will become their nightmare. As the sun set over Sikasso, painting the ancient walls in shades of fire, the transformation began. It was not the panicked flight of a defeated army, but the calculated movement of a people choosing survival over glory. The metal workers quietly packed their tools and the most portable of their precious iron. The griots wrapped their instruments in cloth blessed with protective charms. The women bundled food and medicine while the men selected only the finest weapons, those light enough to carry but deadly enough to matter. Aminata watched it all from her place by the palace gates, sometimes nodding with approval, sometimes shaking her head at the lingering attachments to things that could not be saved. As the first groups of evacuees began to slip away into the darkness, she approached Ibrahim one last time. "The spirits are pleased, my Fama," she said, her voice now softer, more human than before. "But they also warn, this path you choose will change everything. There can be no going back to the old ways, the old certainties. You will become something new, something the white men have not seen before." Ibrahim looked down at this strange woman who had appeared like a messenger from the other world. "What will I become, keeper of songs?" "A legend," she replied simply. "But legends pay a price that mortal men sometimes cannot bear." 3 days later, when Colonel Archinard's column crested the hill overlooking Sikasso, they found the fortress exactly as intelligence had described it. Massive walls, imposing towers, the perfect stronghold of an African king who refused to bend the knee to European power. The French artillery was positioned with mathematical precision. The assault was planned with the confidence of men who had conquered a dozen such fortresses. But when the first shells breached the outer walls and French soldiers poured through the gaps, they found something that no intelligence report had prepared them for: emptiness. Not the emptiness of hasty flight, but the eerie quiet of a place that had been deliberately, methodically abandoned. In the palace, Archinard found a single message written in Arabic on a piece of fine paper, weighted down with a stone from the Niger River. "The lion does not cower in a cage no matter how beautiful. Seek us in the place where the baobab trees whisper secrets to the wind. Ibrahim, Fama of the Wassalu, king of the moving kingdom." The French had won Sikasso, but they had lost Ibrahim. And in the months that followed, as reports filtered in of ambushed supply convoys, of French outposts attacked by warriors who appeared like spirits and vanished like smoke, Colonel Archinard began to understand the magnitude of what had happened. He had not conquered a kingdom. He had created a ghost. In the deep Kenadougou hills, where the ancient baobabs stood like cathedral pillars and the streams ran clear over rocks polished smooth by countless seasons, Ibrahim built something the world had never seen: a kingdom without borders, a royal court that could be packed and moved in a night, a government that existed in the hearts of his people rather than within the walls of a palace. The transformation was not easy. Men who had known only the stability of fixed settlements had to learn the ways of the nomad. Women who had tended gardens for generations had to become experts at foraging and preserving. Children grew up thinking of home not as a place but as wherever their people gathered under the protection of their king. But they adapted, as people always do when survival demands it. The metalworkers learned to work with portable forges. The griots developed new songs, songs of movement and resistance, of victories won through cunning rather than frontal assault. The warriors became masters of what would later be called guerrilla warfare, though they knew it simply as the way of the wise hunter. And always at the center of it all was Ibrahim himself, no longer quite the traditional king he had been trained to be, but not yet fully understanding what he was becoming. He held court under the open sky, dispensed justice from beneath spreading acacias, and made decisions that affected thousands while sitting on a simple mat that could be rolled up and carried by a single man. Aminata stayed with them for several moons, her prophecy fulfilled but her purpose not yet complete. She taught the other griots new songs, songs that would carry the story of this transformation to the farthest reaches of the Wassalu country and beyond. She instructed the marabouts in readings of the Quran that spoke of exile and eventual triumph, of patience in the face of overwhelming odds. But most importantly, she served as Ibrahim's conscience during those difficult early months when the weight of what he had done sometimes threatened to crush his spirit. "Do you regret it?" he asked her one night as they sat around a small fire, the sounds of the sleeping camp around them like a lullaby. Above, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, the same stars that had guided his ancestors across this land for uncounted generations. "Regret?" Aminata stirred the coals with a stick, sending sparks dancing upward to join the stars. "Does the seed regret breaking open so the tree can grow? Does the caterpillar regret dissolving so the butterfly can emerge?" "Pretty words," Ibrahim replied, but his voice carried a weariness that had not been there in the palace at Sikasso. "But I have made my people wanderers, my nobles into fugitives. Some nights I wonder if Bakari was right, if I have chosen the path of the jackal after all." Aminata was quiet for a long time, and when she spoke, her voice carried the weight of prophecy once more. "My Fama, do you know why the French fear us most when we are like this? Because we are harder to find?" "No." Her eyes reflected the firelight like those of a hunting cat. "Because when people become their own kingdom, when they carry their freedom in their hearts instead of trusting walls to protect it, they become something colonizers cannot understand. They cannot buy us because we value things that cannot be sold. They cannot intimidate us because we have already chosen to lose everything rather than surrender who we are." She stood, her movements fluid despite her age. "The spirits did not send me to warn you of defeat, Ibrahim. They sent me to prepare you for victory, but a victory that will look nothing like the victories of your fathers." The next morning Aminata was gone, disappeared as mysteriously as she had arrived. Some said they saw her walking north toward the great bend of the Niger, her tattered robes somehow regal in the morning light. Others claimed she had simply dissolved into mist as the sun rose. The griots would argue about it for years, each version of her departure becoming more elaborate with each telling. But her message remained, taking root in Ibrahim's heart like seeds in fertile ground. As the seasons turned and the French struggled to impose their authority on a kingdom that had no fixed address, Ibrahim's reputation grew throughout West Africa. Chiefs and kings from as far away as the Gold Coast sent secret messengers asking how it was done. This art of remaining free while appearing defeated, of turning apparent weakness into actual strength. The French, for their part, found themselves in the peculiar position of having to garrison a fortress they controlled but could not use, ruling over people who smiled politely during the day and vanished into the bush at night. Their maps showed Sikasso as conquered, but their soldiers reported that the pacified territory remained stubbornly uncooperative. Supply convoys required ever larger escorts. Tax collection became a military operation. The simple act of sending a message from one French outpost to another required careful planning and no small amount of luck. The Phantom King and his mobile court had turned the entire region into a puzzle that European military thinking was ill-equipped to solve. In the hidden camps, meanwhile, a new culture was emerging. Children who had been toddlers when Sikasso was abandoned grew into young adults who thought of ambush tactics as naturally as their grandparents had thought of farming techniques. Young women learned to pack and move an entire household in the time it took to boil water for tea. Young men became experts at what the French military manuals would eventually classify as asymmetric warfare, though to them it was simply the art of staying alive and free. And at the center of it all, Ibrahim continued his own transformation. The king who had once ruled from a throne of carved ivory now held court in clearings that changed with the seasons. His crown was still the golden pendant his father had worn, but his palace was the vast sky above and the good earth below. His subjects numbered in the thousands, but they were scattered across a territory larger than many European kingdoms. The griots began to compose new praise songs, poems that captured this strange new reality. Behold Ibrahim the wise, who turned defeat into victory, loss into gain, the ending into the beginning. His kingdom has no borders because it exists everywhere. His palace has no walls because his people are his walls. The white men counted his cities but could not count his power. They mapped his roads but could not find his kingdom. Years passed. The French consolidated their control over the fixed points, the cities, the trading posts, the river crossings. But the countryside remained contested, a chess game played by masters who followed completely different rules. European pawns moved in straight lines along roads and rivers, while African knights leaped over obstacles and struck from unexpected directions. Ibrahim aged as all men do, but the hardships of the mobile life had tempered him like fine steel. His face became mapped with lines that spoke of countless nights sleeping under stars, of decisions made around cook fires, of the weight of carrying an entire culture's hopes on shoulders that had learned to bend without breaking. The day came when news reached the hidden camps that Colonel Archinard had been recalled to France, his mission declared complete despite the obvious reality that the Wassoulou remained unconquered. His replacement arrived with fresh enthusiasm and new strategies, but also with the growing understanding that the problem he faced was unlike anything in European military experience. "They are learning," Ibrahim observed to Moussa Daïra as they watched French patrols from a concealed position in the hills above one of their former villages. "Look how they move now, not like conquerors marching through defeated territory, but like nervous hunters in unfamiliar forest." Moussa nodded. Age and the wandering life had carved new wisdom into his features as well. "Perhaps, my Fama, it is time to consider what victory looks like for us. We have proven that we cannot be truly conquered. But we have also not driven them away." It was a question that had haunted Ibrahim for months. What was the end point of this struggle? How long could his people maintain this existence between worlds, free but rootless, victorious but homeless? The answer came, as answers often do, from an unexpected direction. A new messenger arrived in camp, not one of their usual scouts but a young woman whose dress and bearing marked her as coming from far away. She claimed to represent a coalition of traditional rulers from across West Africa, men and women who had been watching Ibrahim's experiment with great interest. "Kings and queens from Dahomey to the Gambia send greetings," she announced formally after the proper protocols had been observed. They wished to know if the Fama of the Wassoulou would consider sharing his knowledge. Ibrahim received her in the traditional manner, though his throne room was a grove of mahogany trees and his courtiers sat on mats rather than ceremonial stools. "What knowledge do they seek, daughter?" "How to remain free while appearing to submit," she replied directly. "How to preserve our ways while accommodating theirs. How to become like water, yielding to the container but retaining its essential nature." The request sparked long debates around the council fires. Some of Ibrahim's advisors worried about revealing secrets that might be turned against them. Others argued that their isolation, however dignified, was ultimately a dead end. But Ibrahim himself saw something larger: the possibility that their experiment in survival might become a template for resistance across the continent. "Send this message," he finally told the young diplomat. "The knowledge belongs to all of Africa's children. Let those who would learn send their wisest counselors. We will teach what we have learned and perhaps learn what they have to teach in return." Thus began the final transformation of Ibrahim's kingdom. What had started as a desperate flight from superior firepower evolved into something unprecedented. A university of resistance, a school for the preservation of African identity in the face of European domination. Chiefs and advisors made pilgrimage to the moving court, learning techniques that range from the practical, how to organize supply networks that could function without fixed bases, to the philosophical, how to maintain cultural integrity while adapting to changing circumstances. The griots developed new forms of oral tradition that could carry complex information across vast distances. The marabouts created networks of Islamic scholars who could coordinate resistance while appearing to focus only on religious matters. The French authorities, increasingly frustrated by reports of mysterious gatherings in the bush and the growing sophistication of opposition to their rule, never fully understood what they were facing. Their intelligence reports spoke of Ibrahim as if he were still simply a recalcitrant chief hiding in the forest, not recognizing that he had become something entirely new, the first truly modern African leader, one who understood that the struggle for freedom in the colonial era would require new forms of organization and new definitions of victory. As the 19th century drew to a close, Ibrahim found himself an old man, his hair white as the cotton that had once enriched his homeland, his body bent by years of hardship. But his eyes remained keen, and his mind sharp as the day Aminata had stumbled into his courtyard with her warning. He had lived to see the birth of new forms of African resistance across the continent. Some of his former students had returned home to lead movements of their own. Others had established networks that would endure long after the colonial period ended. The techniques pioneered in the Wassalu Hills were being adapted from the forests of the Gold Coast to the mountains of Ethiopia. On what would prove to be his final rainy season, as the clouds gathered over the hidden camps and the sound of distant thunder reminded everyone of the power that moved through all things, Ibrahim called his closest advisors together for one last council. "My children," he said, his voice still strong despite his age, "the woman who came to warn us in Sikasso spoke truly. We have become something new. But our work is not finished. It will not be finished in our lifetimes, nor in the lifetimes of our children. What we have started here is a conversation between Africa and the world that will continue for generations." He gestured toward the young faces gathered around him, men and women who had grown up in the mobile kingdom, who thought of adaptation and resistance as natural as breathing. "You are the future of this continent. Not kings and queens in the old sense, but guardians of something more precious than any throne, the knowledge that freedom is not something that can be given or taken away, but something that exists wherever people choose to nurture it." The old king died as he had lived those final years, under the open sky, surrounded by his people, with the sound of praise songs and prayers filling the air. His passing marked the end of an era, but not the end of the story he had helped to write. The griots would carry the tale far and wide, adding new verses with each telling. The story of the woman in rags who brought a warning that changed history. The story of the king who chose wisdom over pride, survival over glory. The story of a people who learned that the strongest kingdoms are those that live in the hearts of free men and women. And somewhere, perhaps, in the deep places where spirits gather to watch over the living, Aminata Barrow smiled as she listened to the songs that would never be silenced, the stories that would never be conquered, the wisdom that would outlast all empires. The French would remain in the Wassalu country for many more years. They would build their roads and their schools, impose their laws and their language. But they would never again face an opponent quite like Ibrahim, and they would never fully understand why their victory had felt so much like defeat. For they had conquered a place, but Ibrahim had preserved a people. They had claimed territory, but he had protected identity. They had won according to the rules of their own game, but he had proven that there were other games to play, other ways to win, other definitions of power that did not depend on walls or weapons or the recognition of distant capitals. In the end, perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. The drum speaks the final truth. The lion who would not be caged became the wind that moves through all things. The king who lost his throne became the teacher of kings. The warning brought by a woman in rags became the wisdom that outlasts empires. Listen, children of Africa. This is how people choose to remain free.